I'm really interested in like the psychosomatic like area of this whole topic for sure. And then definitely like the way that relates to harmony. Like, let me ask you this, like what, how would someone go about being more relaxed and bringing more power to their singing without introducing more force?
That is an ultimate question. And I'm glad that you decided to ask it in that way, because I think a lot of people try to ask it, but kind of stumble across words because it's very contradictory. How do you relax while literally putting forth more effort? The big thing is that coordination that we talked about before. When you apply a lot of, say, it's referred to as subglottal pressure. That's the fancy science for it. But that literally means like your lung pressure that you utilize with your abdominal muscles. You don't actually ever use your diaphragm. Your diaphragm is simply connected to a crap ton of muscles that are involved in breathing, and a whole bunch of other structures are connected to your diaphragm. So whenever you exhale or inhale, that's other muscle groups, like your abdomen, for example, has to do with exhalation. So when you push your air out of your body, it should almost feel like you're doing a little bit of a crunch, or at least your brain is activating the same neurons that are connected to that jump. Whenever you inhale, it's the same way, but just muscles of the opposite direction. That's why whenever you breathe, you always feel like your muscles in your neck and your shoulders and all that crap are going off. But with that power to kind of effort ratio, you have to realize where the effort is really being put forth. When you provide a consistent flow of air, so that's really what your lung capacity is there for, is consistency. You give a nice foundation of a predictable air pressure for your vocal cords to work with. That also has to do with the volume, but it doesn't necessarily have to do with too much else at this point. When we're talking about pitch glides, your vocal cords change orientation. They get longer, they get thinner, they change the amount of air pressure needed to like make them vibrate at a certain volume, and that's not to get into, the more complex things of like vocal injuries and, vocal recovery and stuff like that. That complicates that junk even worse. But whenever you work on those two things, it is important to remember that they're independent components. Most of the time, whenever you want to apply an awful lot more abdominal pressure, you naturally want to apply an awful lot more pressure in your vocal cords, but that's where you start to come with that like tension. It's not necessary to bring them together in the exact same amount. You can manipulate these components independently. That starts to get even more complicated when you start to apply the filter, which is everything above your vocal cords. It's like your tongue, your teeth, your lips, your nasal cavity, the back of your throat is another thing too. All of those different components have individual muscles, and that's the kind of stuff that like exercises will help you learn to acquire the control over.
So really simply, let me ask you, like, I know this could be, drawn out, so complicated,
right?
But super simply, when you're talking about the filter and kind of like the throat, nose, jaw kind of region,
right?
What's important to keep to mind in terms
relax
of that?
Your tongue, bro. That's it. It's very weirdly stated. Relax your tongue. Your tongue is a huge muscle that connects all of those parts that you just talked about. And whenever you talk, your tongue does a lot more moving than you are aware of. It's just not something that we're wired in to like feel all the time. When you sing, it's what helps control your pitch. When you sing high, the base of your tongue moves up. When you sing low, the base of your tongue pushes your larynx down. The tension within your tongue restricts the movement of things that help you hit pitch. That's where a lot of my like focus is, honestly, is just the relaxation of that junk. But as far as like that tension is concerned too, that can be generated by trying to put forth too much effort in between your vocal cords. When you squeeze your vocal cords really hard together, this is what they sound like. If I applied a lot more air pressure, then that sound would have leveled out, but I still wouldn't have been able to sustain it for too long because of all the pressure I'm putting forth in my vocal cords. That type of tension can also bleed into like muscle groups in the surrounding area. Something that is for some reason a new concept for a lot of the researchers out there, but I don't know why, I kind of just always assumed it to be the case. But muscle, or rather exercise science and muscle science is exactly the same as singing. You're using muscles. You atrophy muscles. You can overwork muscles. It's the exact same thing as if you go to the gym all the time and you know what a workout routine is. It's literally the same. It's just on such a small scale that not a lot of people kind of make that connection. So anytime that you're talking about that tension and relaxation, think about it the same way as you would, working muscle groups. Did you do leg day 3 days in a row? Did you do arm day multiple days in a row? Is there a reason why you feel extra like jelly today? Is there a reason why your stability is a little bit lax because your muscles are still trying to recover? Things like that also have to do a lot with finding your own ability to relax within vocal practice and growth is recognizing, where you're at fatigue-wise as well. That's just another rabbit hole, though. So when you're talking about like relaxation and stuff like that, the first place that you should notice is your throat. Is your throat, like when you talk or whenever you do anything, you feel like muscles or structures are being held in any certain orientation? When you speak, it should just feel like it's just like, almost the same as breathing in and out, because that's effectively what you're doing. When you're talking, you're only exhaling. You're just stopping the airflow with your vocal cords a little bit. But whenever you're feeling like what I like to refer to as vocal placement, which is not an accurate term, so if any speech people or voice people listen to that and talk about, it's technically resonant location. Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm just doing it for everybody else. Placement. It should feel like it's kind of just all vibrating in your mouth. It's not like focused on any single individual location. That's kind of why it's your natural frequency. It's your natural sound. It just kind of bleeds into you as a person, and you as a structure, rather. But whenever you start to sing, you change quality, like make it nasal or bright, or move anything like that, you can kind of feel a slight vibratory shift within the different filters of your voice. So whenever you're talking about a natural tonality, I always have to go back to speech, as I said before, and that's why like that vibratory tone just kind of feels like it generates in your throat, but it dissipates immediately into the structures above that, because that's, again, your natural tone. Think of it like when you knock on a wall, or whenever you're standing in a room and you're singing like random pitches, or you listen to like guitar play and there's always that one tone that makes the whole room go like wah, 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 wah. That's basically what's going on, but with you as like a physical structure.
Wow. So yeah, you're saying like relaxing the voice, and then as you move through different pitches, there's the powers coming from a different place along your vocal cord?
It kind of, you'll notice like different focal points. Like whenever you sing, again, like that nasal tone, like you can feel the vibration of that behind your nose as opposed to being in your mouth behind your teeth. This is like a bit of a complex situation to talk about via the phone, but that's exactly what becoming aware of will allow you to kind of start to manipulate, especially when you're talking about harmonies, or whenever you're talking about genres. There's genre-specific sound. Bluegrass has a natural tint to it, shall we say, or twang. And singing bright and brassy and behind your front teeth or behind your nose is certainly beneficial, because you don't have the low end of a bass guitar or drums that are incredibly drowning out, low end singing. Like, it's just helpful for the chord structure from the music all in all to sing bright and brassy like that. Let's take Casey in some Magic Bean songs. He likes to sing in his natural speaking voice. Same with Scott. And a lot of that time, it allows for multiple, like my big focus about that is really just the longevity of the voice. It's multiple gigging, throughout the week. You're playing like 2 to 3 hour sets, and you're making sure that you're not blowing out your stuff because, you have that chunk going on. If they did that stuff on the album, you could tell that there's a little bit more of like a leeway in how they sing. It's a little bit brighter. It's a little bit brassier. It's a little bit more energetic for, just the fact that they can kind of get away with a little bit more. But again, sometimes those tactics aren't necessarily great for like longevity and touring. But yeah, as far as like a nice, comfortable, relaxed tone generation is concerned, that self-awareness is really the big thing. When you can create that type of placement with minimal effort and allow it to be located in the various locations that you want, that's how you know that you're on top of your game and you're doing what you need to do. The fun thing that I've been kind of running into a lot recently that is a very interesting teaching kind of obstacle is people that are classically trained are trying to sing pop music or like jam music or, just get out for karaoke. But learning how to sing classically involves an awful lot of like forced structural differences that is away from, let's call it homeostasis, like whenever your body is naturally relaxed and in the state of equilibrium. Opera singing involves structure changes. So I can't, in good faith, tell these people that I can take 30 years of practiced experience and then just remove it so they can sing these types of songs. Like, they're always going to have an element of that classical voice training. So if there are people that are from a classical background trying to get into the jam scene too, like, it's just an extra level of effort that you have to apply that you don't think that is almost ever necessary. But it definitely is when you're trying to crack those weird old habits that you've trained most of your life to create,
Right on. Yeah, it seems like the way the tension builds up, in the body, it's unavoidable. And, it's really interesting to hear in different people the way that comes through their voice, singing or not singing. And to hear you talk about, yeah.
That's why festival season is super important to me. That's where I get most of my ability to like sit down with people and be like, yo, here's what we're doing.
Like at a festival?
Yeah, festivals are actually way easier to work with bands than it shows, just simply because of load in and load out and all the other weird aspects of the business that need to happen. Luckily enough, at this point, like, I'm experienced with that, so I can kind of like find my own way in there, which I don't really think a lot of voice teachers can say. They know the ins and outs of a lot of merch operations, but yeah, it's definitely my way into kind of like force the voice work on the people that want it and need it. Like, it's really hard to be able to focus while you're on tour to be like, I need to improve myself. It's not just like survival and, get things in and out of the trailer the whole time. Very unique lifestyle for sure. But yeah,
Wow.
that's my primary focus is doing the voice stuff. The merch stuff is really just because, 9 times out of 10, the band only has time at certain towns because they have to travel. So I justify my own travel by working for them, and, they do the voice stuff because why not?
Nice.
Yeah, it works out pretty well. It's starting to finally lean towards more of the voice stuff than the merch stuff, which was the end goal for myself in the first place. Like, my merch stuff was kind of like just to get my foot in the door. So that's always awesome. Like,
Right on.
whenever you work with cool people like the Dwellers, like, I did both. And that was just super fun for me because as much as I like to watch shows and be in the pit with everybody else, there's something so much more comforting about standing behind a merch table with like 2 foot of plastic table between me and some crazy wackadoo crowd that's super fun to watch from that little bastion of salvation. Plus, you never know whatever you can run into. The merch life is pretty interesting.
Oh man, I've heard some crazy stories for sure. So, dude, like, let's say, I'm coming to you. I'm a musician, and I'm looking to improve my singing.
Right.
What are some like straight up fundamentals off the bat?
So let's just talk about, we're not going to mention names, but let's just talk about generic things that you can find for sure in the jam scene. I assume that you would be a singer from the jam scene. At this point, you probably spent most of your time focusing on your instrument, like guitar, drums, what have you. And singing's always just something that's you've been assumed to be able to do. But you used to do the same type of muscle memory work. So the first thing that I think a lot of people that try to pursue voice technique and education is really concerned is patience. You're quite literally building new like pathways in your brain to do stuff when you sing, and it's a part of your brain that involves very, very specific and minute movements that can make a huge drastic change in the quality of your voice. So patience is super important. Lots of other common problems that take place in our scene is like most people think that they're not pushing hard enough, but they cause like tension everywhere when they sing, specifically in between their vocal cords. That tension will create like a gravelly tone, and you'll throw your voice out. So I call it tension from pushing. But you're not only just pushing your vocal cords, you're pushing like, you know, your lung pressure by trying to build that up and make a louder sound or whatever have you. But there needs to be a lot more coordination between the different mechanisms in your voice to do that appropriately without damaging yourself. The other thing is honestly, people think too much. Like every time that you take a voice lesson from me too, I mean, I ramble off information like nobody's business, and it's really because I get excited about it all. But when you fixate too much and you don't just like try to let it happen and believe that it will happen, you'll get in your own way. Like you'll become too much of a perfectionist to allow progress to take place, if that makes sense. Yep. As far as that's concerned, though, most people just don't put enough focus on the basics, like doing intervals, singing the same scales that you would play on a guitar. That's really most of it. And making sure that you're a stickler for accuracy. That's probably the biggest thing that we have a problem of in the jam scene is tonal accuracy. Again, shout out to the Dwellers. They are lucky enough to sing in bluegrass, which has an awful lot of dependency on tonal accuracy. So they have a little bit of a less steep hill to climb than others whenever they have to work with that stuff. But that's really, you know, that's just kind of the nature of the beast. That's why you work the intervals. That's why you do the basic stuff so that accuracy kind of follows suit.
Right on. And yeah, that there's a lot like to unpack from that. I like how you talked about the tension from pushing thing. That seems like a pretty relatable concept to any you know, kind of action or field, you know.
Especially when you're trying to learn something new, I find. Lots of people want to put forth 110% effort in the thought that that speeds up the increase of, or speeds up the rate of acquisition of that new skill. When really it's developing a personal philosophy that allows you to accept said new skill. You don't want to put forth like 1,000% effort because that leads to the overthinking, that leads to the tension from pushing, and it gets away from the overall objective of whatever we're trying to do. Most of what is singing, oddly enough, is psychosomatic. It's about your brain and how, you know, you allow yourself to feel in certain scenarios and situations. Being aware of something is not the same as thinking about it vehemently. So whenever you're aware of your problems or aware of your limitations or aware of where your instabilities in your voice lie, then you can start to allow for these new things to progress. Whenever you beat yourself up for them, whenever you try to, like, you know, force the problem to eliminate itself, then that's when you generate tension and you kind of get in your own way.
Interesting. Yeah, and it's really cool, like, hearing you speak. Like, not only do you have to be like a professional music teacher, but just the entire concept of learning itself is like, it seems like that's exactly what you're dealing with, like someone's ability to relax and integrate like the lesson you're trying to teach in and of itself. Like I could only imagine trying to match pitch singing with your voice, because it's not like a piano where you have the exact key that's in a tune, you know?
Right. Oh yeah, there's and that's the weird part too. I mean, just from teaching, oh my gosh, I probably have taught close to 40 professional performers up until this point. But singing is not singing against a synthesizer or piano or anything, for sure. And it's mostly because people have varying qualities of voice, especially when we talk about stuff like vibrato. Let's just use Greg, for example. Greg from Pigeons has a very musical theater-backed sound. He has a very full, bright tone. It's called legitimate placed voice. It's also called CCM, or contemporary commercial music voice placement. It's not like operatic or anything like that. But the nature of those tones kind of gets away from having big vibrato. Anytime that he sings, it's very like a straight tone. It's not like wavering very far. It doesn't have any flourishes in it. It's just like accurate and expressive. The contrary to that would be, an operatic singer, like somebody singing just anything, having that massive vibrato. Like you don't have a central tone there. You're singing like 2 to 3 different flipping notes. And just from the nature of working with so many different singers and listening to what their natural voices are instead of a forced kind of genre-specific voice, listening to like just the spectrum of what people can bring to you is really what intrigues me about singing. Like it's just, I want to know what everybody sounds like, because everybody sounds so flippin' weird and different. It's so cool. And that's really the big thing about working with such a wide array of people too, is you just get this large spectrum of, I guess, unique experiences on a regular basis.
So then voice lessons must be pretty customized, right? Like if someone were to ask you, like, how do I get to be, singing in the most, proper way for myself, is that different from person to person?
I would have to say yes. And I mean, I'm not exactly the most traditional of voice teachers, simply because my background is more in like clinical sciences and stuff like that. So I do approach it like that. I'd make each individual case like its own individual experience for the person involved. There's always some type of thing in your way. Somebody wants to either improve their breathing, or somebody wants to be able to sing like incredibly long stanzas. Let's think about like modern hip hops and the super fast verses that seem to go on for 45 seconds. There's people that want to do that junk. And they all have different focuses. And the funny thing is, though, the biggest and most consistent wall that you have to break down is everybody is almost not allowing themselves to use their natural voice. Like when you ask somebody to speak, they don't think about it. They just like make sound, right? You don't feel tension. You don't even look and feel your vocal cords vibrate. It's just kind of like this thing. But when you tell them to sing, there's like a whole bunch of crap that starts to move in your throat, in your body, like your posture. But it's all kind of, again, going from that like forced pushing thing. It's not natural. It's not going back to what you naturally can just produce without thinking of it. That's why I always root my stuff into speech. That helps you be able to know how to work on your own gradient. Like if you need to match pitch with somebody else, you now know where your 0 point is and how much effort you need to put forth to reach that matching goal. That's really, that's like next level stuff that we would talk about, but that's how you start to reduce effort and tension, even though you have to take yourself out of your natural sound. Obviously, the first goal is to find what your individual natural sound is. So that's what the catered experience is really really geared towards. It's for you to be able to do what you need to do with the most natural tone that you produce. And then when we start to work into the next level stuff like harmonies, then that's where you start to meet it. I actually have to give a quick shout out here to Matt from Fletcher's Grove. Whenever they came up and played one of their shows in Pittsburgh recently, we sang an old barbershop tune that he just whipped out of his back pocket, and oddly enough was like both of us like downloaded it on Kazaa back 20 years ago, and that was what we both ended up singing to forever, and it was awesome, just me and him singing that. Oh, that was just some super cool stuff. Harmony is such a bang up thing. That's why it's a treat to work with people that experiment in it a lot, like Fletcher's and like Kitchen Dwellers. And Beans too, man. Ever since that Off Leash album, they like really did bring out an awful lot more harmonies, and just working with those guys is super cool. And big shout out to Patty from Cycles too. He's been trying to bear some weight with the vocal requirements, and we've been doing a lot of talking in the off times as well. So I'm just glad to see that everybody is starting to realize that this harmony and vocal stuff is important.
It is important. It's fucking awesome to hear like your perspective from studying like speech in college and transitioning it to singing. So let me ask, like, just generally speaking, in the body, where should a person's natural voice like originate from? Right on. And you're talking about different like muscle groups, like leg day, arm day. So that makes me wonder, like, there's definitely different mechanics that go into having like a super full voice as opposed to how it would be to sing, really high notes.
Right.
So there's like start from singing like high. Like, what would be some like super 101 like mechanics with that?
Well, there's two different ways that we can do that as singers. There's head voice or falsetto. That's like either talking to dogs or baby voice. That's always what I like to kind of have people exercise with whenever they're there's people out there that can't do that pretty regularly, actually. So you have to literally be like I'm lucky enough to have a dog, so I'm like, talk to my dog. And that's like the first time they'll ever use their falsetto voice. Absolutely wild. But then there's belting. Belting is very good way to put it. It's very Greg from Pigeons. He has a nice solid belt whenever his voice is healthy. That's exactly what is the other alternative to hit high notes in our ranges. So what happens whenever you're hitting high notes is quite literally like your vocal cords are stretching out and thinning out. Think of it like, tuning up a guitar string. It keeps climbing in pitch the tighter that you wind it. And it's the same type of stuff with your vocal cords, but they vibrate together like a reeded instrument. And that's literally all the pitch is. The only other thing that really affects that is the location of your voice box, your larynx or your Adam's apple or whatever you want to say. I'm going to keep saying larynx because, well, it's bred into me at this point. But whenever that lifts in your throat, that it's helping you sing higher pitches because it allows your vocal cords to stretch out farther the higher that your larynx raises. Whenever you depress your larynx or push it down to sing low notes, it brings all of your vocal cords back together and it makes them all fat. And the airflow changes, and that's where that gravelly tone comes from. It's actually just the rate of vibration. It allows us to perceive individual fat beats between voices or between vibrations. And that's kind of where, it's just weird little stuff that you kind of start to pay attention to. But singing high notes, you need to have a lovely conjunction of all of that control that we talked about before in coordination. You need to have abdominal support. You need to have a nice relaxed throat that is allowing the structures to orient itself in a nice high pitch. And then you want to focus on where that pitch is super resonating, which generally anything above your speaking voice, I like to say you should always try to focus that placement, sorry, voice scientist again, placement right behind your two front teeth. If you take the tip of your tongue and you put it right behind the ridge of like that little bump of skin right behind where you should feel most of that vibration. It also helps to, whenever you focus vibrations there, your whole head kind of starts to reverberate, and that's why people are perceived as singing much louder with that placement figured out.
Right
Chris
on.
Duffy, actually, shout out to Chris Duffy for singing that "Learning to Fly" over the past few. I'm looking forward to potentially seeing that again on that live stream that I know I'm going to be purchasing it on in a little bit. So yeah,
hey,
that's a great example of that stuff is him smashing that.
Correct me if I'm wrong. So earlier in this podcast, you kind of said something along the lines of when you pitch, it's like between what you call, C sharp and D, right?
Right.
It's like off pitch, almost D, and then you hit the D, right? And then if you have a tuner on your guitar, it says it's green, like you're on the D.
Right.
Are you saying that there's specific points along the vocal cord that are basically coordinated to those focal points along the musical scale? Or is that not understanding what you're saying properly?
I'm going to say that there's not specific points, like there's not like a fret on the fretboard, but I will say that there's awareness of muscle memory. So that's why when you sing intervals, the 1 3 5 3 1 are like the stereotypical chorus exercises that you've heard in high school or elementary school or whenever the last time you sang in a choir was, if you ever did that. But all of the very stereotypical exercises, that's their point. Their point is to get you used to singing common intervals accurately without thinking about it. Like if you give me a starting pitch, I almost guarantee you that just because I've done so many 1 3 5 1 3 5 7 5 3 1 intervals in my life, with that starting pitch I could probably approximate gosh darn 99.99% accuracy every time, regardless of my state of being. And it's just because of that muscle memory and drilling it into myself. That's where that patience thing comes into play. So when you're talking about like fretboard accuracy and stuff to be able to snap right into, it comes from repetition, just like it does whenever you're working out with your other more conventional instruments.
So there's not necessarily like a biological basis for the musical scale.
Nah, I mean it's specific per person, so that's why I can't say anything like that. Like your vocal cords are different from my vocal cords. My vocal cords are different from my flippin' older brother's vocal cords, who is genetically very similar to me. Like we all have our weird little nuances and differences. So the amount of tension that I apply to my vocal cords are slightly different than the amount of tension that you would provide for your vocal cords to hit the same pitch, if that makes sense. So if you like, as far as I'm concerned, is if you have to put like a measurement behind it, our measurements are slightly different, so therefore each case is unique.
Gotcha.
But again, that's where perception comes in. Like your voice is, since you're a male, you can still sing within the same restrictions that I am, or I can. Our ranges are going to be approximate to each other unless you can somehow magically sing super high tenor and therefore sing into the alto range, in which case kudos to you. I can't do that. I'm a low bass kind of guy. I stay very, very low on the piano. And that's the kind of stuff that, is allowed to be generic across populations. As far as independent, like, restrictions are concerned, that's it. It's case by case basis.
Right on. Well, shit, man. It's awesome to hear you divulge your top secret master blueprints on how to sing. Man, so let me ask you now, like, what are you looking at doing vocal teaching wise? Like, are you looking to bring on new clients right now? Are you looking to kind of go find some bands that you can go on tour with once tours are back?
a little bit of both, actually. The cool part about doing the studio work and home stuff is, especially honestly, this is the bright side of this pandemic junk, if you want to even say that there is a bright side to it, is people are starting to learn to rely on that kind of communication a little bit more as far as high-tech stuff, FaceTime being used. I use Facebook Messenger literally for most of my business, and I use Google Hangouts for most of my other business. I could use other programs, but at the same time, they're free, they're there, and they work. That opens up an awful lot more doors. That means that I don't have to physically travel anywhere to do at least my voice stuff. So that I kind of locked into studio work. As far as bands and touring is concerned, I'm always open for that stuff. Man, like touring and experiencing that junk with the Beans and a little bit with Cycles and, Kitchen Dwellers when they come to town. I haven't been able to hop on the road with them too much. But that stuff's like super fun. Shout out to Mungion for New Year's. That was probably the most fun 3 days of my life. Super good time. Those guys brought me out there to do merch and voice stuff too. Basically, the goal is to have more studio work because that's where the consistency is. But it's always super fun to be able to work and travel with people that are on the road doing it in the trenches. And I got to say, my current education, we didn't really talk about too much of that chunk, but my current education is in vocology, which is a new science. I'm about to get done with it in a few. It's not really new. It was coined in like the late 80s, but it's only now recognized as vocology. You can have an educational path for it. And I'm certified in vocology is quite literally the clinical application of sciences of voice science specifically geared towards singers and performers. It is.
So what are some of the underlying discoveries that science is kind of bringing to the forefront?
That singing is its own beast. Voice and voice analysis has been around for a long time, especially in the way of speech specifically. But obviously with technological limitations and ways to study the brain and how the brain works, like half my education is in like neuro stuff. That's like really what opened up the understanding of how coordinated singing truly is. Like speech in and of itself is like a fascinating biological process, but singing and having the ability to control your speech mechanism to such degree, especially when you consider that the fact that we speak itself is actually a secondary function. Our vocal cords aren't there for talking. They're there for keeping liquid out of our lungs. The fact that we use them for talking is kind of fancy. It's why we have an entire section of our brain dedicated towards it. But that's really like, I don't really know. It's kind of like the weird aspect of science that got me into all of it.
That's cool. So vocology. So they're different beasts, singing and speaking.
Yeah.
Like how so? So then like with singing being its own beast and speaking being another beast, like what's different pertaining to each?
What's different is honestly the degree of things that you have to be aware of at the same time. When you speak, there's a lot of things that we take for granted. And that's something that we develop as infants. You watch people talk, especially if you don't have any type of slight issue to kind of overcome. Shout out to my students that grew up with hearing aids. They're like some of the coolest people to work with because they have a unique perspective of how speech and sound is supposed to be. Super cool stuff. But that's really like one of the big things is, it's hard to really put it down to words unless you wanted to sit down and learn a language development course. But we learn that junk before we're self-aware to a point where we can monitor our own process of acquisition. By the time we understand what's going on, we've already been doing it for 20 years. So speech is something that we naturally take for granted. When we sing, especially, I've had a pretty decent resurgence of like people who like to sing karaoke for fun, and they've never sung outside of karaoke their entire lives. Like they just go to the bar and sing 2 songs, and that's all that they're singing. Is they don't even sing in the shower or anything like that. But those types of people, it's really interesting to try to teach them that level of control. There's always like a lot of apprehension. There's always a lot of kind of confusion and self-discovery because they've never used their voice for anything other than speaking and the natural inflections that change your pitch, within the confines of a conversation. So whenever you try to get people to sustain a note for the first time, it's really weird. It makes me think of the scene in Music Man where he makes those 4 people sing Barbershop. That's like the most accurate thing ever, except for the fact that he makes 4 complete and total professionals sing, so they sound amazing. But like when you make somebody sing for the first time, it's like watching a child learn how to walk or learn how to run. Like it's watching their brains fire for new sensations that they've never really screwed around with paying attention to. I wish I could get into more detail than that, but that's pretty much what it's like. You can teach somebody to sing who has never sung before. All the people out there that claim to be tone deaf and all that junk, tone deafness only affects less than like 0.1% of the human population. So, and that's like a genetic thing that you can verify. So the people that say that they're tone deaf just simply haven't sat down and put forth the effort. It's the same way it was whenever I walk past like people painting. I'm like, wow, how did you get so good? Well, the obvious answer to that is they put thousands of hours into making badass looking art. And it's the same thing about singing.